Jema. We are with the Gita, essays on the Gita, and Sri Aurobindo speaks of the Gita as one of those attempts at synthesis. Now, we see this constantly happening in Indian spiritual thought and experience, that there are streams, each of which is like a line through which a kind of experience of the divine has taken place. We are using the word divine, but let's say of the unknowable has taken place. And then again, there is a tendency or an effort to bring them all together. And they all spring from the mighty Vedas, which by its nature is integral. So the Vedas have the Jnana Kand and the Karma Kand, and people tend to divide them into two. There are some who say Karma Kand is indispensable, others who say Gyan Kand is important, but actually the Vedas themselves do not create that kind of distinction because it's integral. So life, outer life, all the forces at play, worldly life, and the inner, deeper, higher spiritual life, they are one single reality. So thus we see in the Upanishads primarily the Jnana Kand. So it takes up the jnana aspect, the essence. But in the process, it often misses out the outer world, which has its own relevance and reality. So then again, after the age of Upanishads, we see other attempts at synthesis. One of them is, of course, the Gita. So Gita takes up all the different streams which were around that time, that is Sankhya, Yoga. Yoga is equivalent to Karma Yoga in the Gita. And Vedanta, it takes up all of them and brings up a synthesis. Otherwise, they were all isolated streams. Later on, we see another synthesis, effort at synthesis, which Sri Aurobindo speaks very highly as a bold attempt, though a rash and premature attempt at synthesis, which is Tantra. So Tantra takes up that aspect which has been neglected or ignored generally in the Vedanta, which is nature. What is nature? So generally it is Prakriti, and Prakriti, Sankhya explains it is Prakriti is eightfold. The Gita speaks of it as eightfold. So we have these, or in Sankhya it will be described as 21 or 24 elements, 23 elements, which is basically organs of action, karmendriyas, organs of sensations. So ultimately, if we reduce them, the Gita says Panch Mahabhut. So 5 elements, which is the ethereal element, the aerial element, the fire element, the water element, and the earth element. So that's one. Then the mind acts upon these elements to create perception. And then we have the ego, which gives them as something which is very individual, the sense of I. The ego brings that. So we have these senses, we have the mind, we have the ego, and then of course we have the force of nature which is beyond it, and the self which is beyond it. So the self which is beyond it, and this is the nature. So this is fine, this is well known. But what impels this nature? Because typical understanding, if we take to tradition, is that there is the self and there is nature. So how does nature become active? So if we go back to the Sankhya, it's because the Purusha looks into it and that light gets reflected. So nature becomes conscious. So we are conscious. But otherwise, in its ultimate sense, it is jada. It is not conscious. So it appeals to many scientists because, nature itself is not conscious. So where does consciousness come from? And they try to explain in their own way. So it is the Purusha which lends its consciousness into nature. This is how it is described. Sri Krishna has already tackled these questions, and he talks about not only 2 selves but 3 selves. So while the Upanishads will stop at the immutable self, the mutable and the immutable, in the Gita's language, Shar and Akshar, the Gita takes her to next level, and that is the Purushottama. So the third Purusha, which makes sense because that is the origin of bhakti. So when we only talk about the 2 selves, the immutable Brahman, which is untouched, unaffected, and the mutable, which is in the becoming, So, bhakti is regarded as something subordinate, and we will see that in Vedantis. Typical Vedantist will say, yes, bhakti has a place. Well, when you are in ignorance, you do karma kanda and all this, and you have bhakti. But when you realize Brahman, there is no bhakti because you become that reality. But the Gita brings in something still higher, Purushottama. That is the basis of bhakti. But in the first 6 chapters, the Gita is not explicitly brought out bhakti because it doesn't really describe the Ishvara. It just hints that beyond these two, there is a third, Purushottama. So in the next 6 chapters, it develops about what this Ishvara is, what is he doing, what is his relation with nature, with world, with us. Is there a relation or not? Because immutable Brahman has no relation, apparently. It sounds very strange, but that's how it is. If you really look at it one way, it's Maya. And Maya is that mysterious something which somehow creates these multiple forms which, according to present understanding, it becomes illusion. Although it's illusion in the sense that things are not what they seem. They are something else in their reality. But it doesn't solve the problem. And I'll explain why it doesn't solve the problem. Because, let's put it like this, that this is a table, this is a chair, this is a physical body, this is a camera, all that is fine. So if you resolve all this, you can say, well, this is only a perceived reality. The actual reality is atoms and molecules and charges. And you can go still behind and say, well, these charges, basically it is all nothing but energy. So that leaves us in a limbo. How do I deal? Like somebody calls you on phone, does he say that, hey Jivatman, and expect me to address in the same way? Do the names and forms have a meaning at all? Is there a sense behind all this? So all these questions remain. Now there are ways that traditional Vedanta answers it, and we'll not go into that. It tries to, it doesn't quite answer it. So what is Gita's take on it? So what is this nature? Where does it come from? What is its impelling force? Because nature is as if like a self-moving machinery. But does it receive any impulsion? The Purusha of the Vedanta doesn't give impulsion, it only gives that awareness. So what sets into motion? Mysterious Maya. But what really is this? So here comes this important chapter, chapter 25, which is the first chapter in the book 2. And it is the double nature or the two natures. And Sri Aurobindo would develop it to great extent. It is there in the Vedas, but as I said, it's forgotten. In the Upanishads, it takes a background because nature, if you have to be liberated, then nature doesn't matter if there is a supernature. So here, the Gita develops this idea which in a way anticipates the Tantra. There is no Tantra as such in the Gita. But it brings in that aspect of Shakti and how this lower nature ultimately is, behind it is the Shakti. Now Shakti is not ignorant lower nature. This lower nature is a nature of ignorance moved by 3 gunas. And if you look carefully, actually we used to have this question, anybody can raise this question, that if it is only 3 gunas, are there things that do not fall in the category of 3 gunas? For example, what is light? Which guna is this? What is, even if we go to the essence of things, smell. Now, there can be good smell, bad smell, foul smell, and you can categorize. It's a tamasic smell. Taste. So we can say that, well, this taste of this thing is stale, rotten, it's tamasic. Spicy taste, it is rajasic. Very succulent and sweet taste, it is sattvic. But taste in itself, what is taste? What is this essential quality of taste? So here the Gita brings in this element of how the Supreme is connected with creation and what is his nature, which Sri Krishna starts by disclosing that. He says that, I am telling you the eightfold nature described in the Sankhya. Now I will describe to you my nature. So there is another nature than this eightfold. It starts from that. And then he says that this my nature, he uses the word para prakriti. So instantly it means there is the lower ignorant nature and there is the para prakriti, beyond this ignorant lower nature. He doesn't much describe it, but he starts by saying. Then he says this para prakriti becomes the jiva. Para prakritim jiva bhuta. So if we have to use in our terminology, we will say the Divine Mother has become all these little psychic beings inside us. I mean, if I have to use Shobindra's terminology. That's why the psychic being immediately recognizes the Divine Mother. That's why in this yoga, the sign that one is initiated is that one has immediately the revelation of the Divine Mother as the mother. It doesn't go through logic. Because the psychic being is her portion. So instantly it recognizes, like iron recognizes the magnet and rushes towards it. So he says, Para Prakriti has become this jiva. Now this is one point of connection. Para Prakriti is whose nature? Shri Krishna's, his own nature. But it is his own nature that has become the jiva. So now we have one point of connection. This one he reveals. Second, he speaks about Swabhava and Swadharma. So this divine nature in the jiva takes a certain form which is unique and individual to the jiva, but actually it is his true spiritual nature. So we also have two aspects. One is ignorant nature on the surface, and we can take an example, and behind it there is the true spiritual nature which is in the form of Swabhava and Swadharma. For instance, outwardly there is the distortion of anger, and there are some people who are quick to raise issues about justice. But if you go to the Swabhava, he will be a Kshatriya. It is the divine in the becoming who has assumed this aspect of the warrior aspect of the divine. So in the becoming, also there is hint or indication of the divine's becoming. And it is the thing we need to catch. That's why several places, very interestingly, even he says, which is very one of those cryptic verses. On the one side, Gita says, you must rise above desires. On the other side, it says, a desire which is in consonance with dharma is fine. So what is this desire which is in consonance with dharma? Is he referring to sattvic mode? No, that is still a lower ignorant nature. So what is that desire which is in consonance with dharma? That's where the swadharma, the becoming of the divine within us, that desire. And one classic example that personally I enjoy and which comes to me as it's a story, that at the end of the Mahabharata war, Bhima is asked by Gandhari, couldn't you have left one son of mine? See, a sattvic nature will say, I think at least we should leave one child to take care of the parents. Isn't that's how sattvic mode will operate? What does Bhima say? Bhima says, with all my love and respect for you, O mother, let me assure you, if you had 200 sons, I would have killed all of them. Now this is strange. But that is the becoming in Bhima, and he respects it. He is a warrior of that stature. He just can't. He is going by his true nature, his true spiritual nature. He is almost an instrument of Kali, and he must destroy whatever is false, whatever is untrue. That's his becoming. It may not apply to somebody else. So we have Swabhava and Swadharma, and this tendency to put everybody in the same slot, and again, Sattva Guna as the ultimate. The Gita brings this higher dimension. So Swabhava and Swadharma come directly from the Paraprakriti and they settle in the soul, just as the Jiva is from the Paraprakriti, and within the Jiva, his own unique becoming through which he will evolve and progress. The evolutionary principle in nature is the Swabhava and Swadharma. So this is another point of connection. And finally, Sri Krishna reveals a third point of connection in this creation. So that connection is in nature. You have the qualities, the guna, and you have the quantity. These two things are there. What is the essence? And that he says is, I am the essence. And he says very interesting things. I am the intelligence of the intelligent. Now he may misuse it, that's okay, that's that person's issue. The ego comes into play. In the lower nature, ego takes that intelligent as his own and misuses it. But intelligence of the intelligence, intelligent is that. He even goes on to say that people who are, let's say, gambling, so their cunning is also derived from that divine essence. Divine is a diplomat also. We know Sri Aurobindo how he used the word divine diplomacy when the mother duped and Hitler dies. He was literally, whatever, that story is one story. And when Sri Aurobindo was asked about it, he used the word divine diplomacy. So cunning. Now cunning is normally not considered something good. And you played games and you play the game of dice, for example, and you're cunning. But even behind the cunning, the power ultimately comes from there. So everywhere, when you go to the essence, and he starts by the 5 elements, that I am sound in the ether. Now that's how do you categorize sound as which guna? It will depend. The moment it enters into the lower creation, you can say good sound, bad sound, a harsh sound, and you can categorize it. This is a very tamasic sound, very monotonous, boring, puts me to sleep. Or this is a very strong sound, makes my hip and legs shake. Or this is a very sattvic sound which makes me, feel very good and happy. But sound in itself is something which exceeds the gunas. It is the essence of the ethereal principle. And similarly, he says the aerial principle, touch, and earth is, of course, smell, and water is taste, and the fire is light and heat. So he says the essence of everything, I am the essence of everything. Now you see, it opens several doors. Means divine is operating in this creation by his power. And it's not like this is just nature acting blindly like a clockwork machine and the divine is outside. He is not only immanent within us, he is acting, operating. He is the essence, the power without which nothing will be sustained. So we see how beautifully it takes us, Sri Krishna prepares us for Sri Aurobindo's yoga. Because Sri Aurobindo will go then one step forward, that this lower nature can be transformed into a higher supernature because behind it is this divine supernature. That's the logic. But that Sri Krishna stops short of that because that's not the time. And Arjun's mind would have been totally blown off. But he takes him to that point when he says, and that's the last thing, then we'll read. So what is will? So in lower nature, we act according to the will. So ordinarily, if you take the traditional view, this is a will in ignorance. And based on your actions, you have the karma, the consequences, and all this follows. So is there only one will which operates in ignorance? Or is there something called as a higher divine will? Now we take these things for granted, having read Sri Aurobindo. But in traditional Vedanta, it's a very difficult question. Is will only an operation in ignorance, or there is something higher, like a divine will? And individual will can align with it, can be at cross purposes with it, can act completely oblivious of it. So again, Sri Krishna would answer, it is the divine will operates, and that's why he declares in the 11th chapter, because all these next 6 chapters are all about the Ishvara and his glory. So he says, I have come here, and Krishna says, why are you here? Who are you? So he reveals himself as the Vishwarup Darshan. So he asks, why are you here? What is your will here? And Sri Krishna says something very amazing. He says, I have come here as time the destroyer. Kalosmi bhava. What do you want to destroy? Loka shay krita pravradho. I am rising to destroy these peoples. And that's why those who cannot understand the ways of working of the divine, when they look at appearances, like yesterday I had a talk and people were saying, what are the forces operating behind Pakistan's disintegration? And they are blaming it on America, China, Pakistan's policy. But 1971, Mother says Pakistan will break into 5 parts. And all these parts will want to reunite with India. I think it's December 1971. And she says, I have seen it. It's a question of just a little time. So it is the divine will. So you cannot resist it. You may try whatever you want to try, but you cannot resist it. Then, very interestingly, since we are at it, she was also asked about Tibet. Dalai Lama had come here and the interview was there. And she says, Tibet will be liberated. It may take hundreds of years. That's the time span she speaks. So he asks, can it not be, or Kirit Bhai asks, can it not be hastened? She says, yes. And then she gives two conditions. One is that, Sri Aurobindo's thought, if it takes up humanity, and if Tibet could open to that thought, then the dream of Dalai Lama that, a society governed by truth, love and compassion, which is the essence of spiritualized society, it will be realized and Tibet will realize it. But she says, yes, you can hasten the process. And that time I remembered our Tibetan pavilion, which probably, needs a lot more work because it's the point. She has literally, in a sense, sanctioned Tibet as an independent nation. That itself is a sign that Tibet will be free because what the divine is saying. So divine will operates in creation, and as human beings we have to align ourselves. That's why we see how at the end of the Gita, what does Sri Krishna finally say? That you surrender your human will to me. I will take care of the rest. Then there is no papa. Again the same thing about Swadharma and Swabhava. That Bhima is not committing a pap because he is acting according to his highest dharma. So you can't speak of when Kali destroys. So this is the essence of this chapter where he gives us hints and glimpses of the divine nature, not as opposed to, but as something distinct and different from the ignorant human nature or earth nature in which we are trapped. So this is the two natures, and we have already spoken about the first 6 chapters give us the practice. Shri Krishna, because that's urgent. Arjun's question is, what should I do? So the practice is given. But then practice must be based on something more fundamental. So now 7th to 12th chapter, Shri Krishna is revealing to him the metaphysical foundations, particularly the Ishvara. That because he is going to reveal that, Arjun, it's God's will. And I am embodying that will, and you have to become an instrument of that will. So 6th to 12th chapter are a disclosure of the Ishvara. And then 13th to 18th chapter are all this is taken up in great detail. So 7th to 12th chapter brings in the element of bhakti in prominence, because only when there is an Ishvara you can talk about bhakti. You cannot do bhakti to impersonal Brahman. That is one of the problems of the typical Upanishadic lore. So all these and many more beautiful things. So page 264, and we'll start with this passage after the break. So far, the justifying truths that have been offered to it are those with which it is already familiar, and they are only sufficient as a starting point. There is first the distinction between the self and the individual being in nature. So there is the immutable self and there is the individual being. The distinction has been used to point out that this individual being in nature is necessarily subject so long as he lives shut up within the action of the ego to the workings of the 3 gunas, which make up by their unstable movements the whole scope and method of the reason, the mind and the life and senses in the body. And within this circle there is no solution. Wonderful. Applies everywhere. Somebody was asking what is the solution to problem of Auroville. I said first people must rise beyond. Exactly. And the mother spoke about it about the ashram also. She says that in terms of our ideal, we are placed the highest ideal before mankind. in terms of its realization, we are far behind it. And then she says, what is the solution? The solution is each member realizes this truth. And to realize that truth, first is things like this, studies and classes, so that we at least know what we are meant to realize. Otherwise, while we are ignorant, no amount of debate, discussions, fights, quarrels are going to solve. It will be like an endless spiral. There will be lull followed by storm. There will be lull followed by storm. So, therefore, the solution has to be found by an ascent out of the circle, above this nature of the gunas, to the one immutable self and silent spirit. So, of course, the spirit is silent. One can speak, but to that which speaks without mouth. So it uses instruments to speak. It uses instruments to express itself. First thing is that. Without that, there is no solution. I have seen people who often come, of course, as a psychiatrist, that husband and wife are quarreling, and they come and they have a discussion. So this is my most dreaded situation, because I know that they will, in the room they are going to fight. It happens. So unless you see them alone, 2 hours they are still fighting, because he says something and then she gets triggered, she says something, he gets triggered. So you just become a mute witness. So I assume the posture of the immutable self, that okay, after when there is a lull, then you bring in a little bit of things. And that little bit of things is not your right, because they don't come to solve the problem, they come to get a ratification. I am right. So this is how the whole thing goes in human nature. It's not about one person or two persons. People fight. After some time they are exhausted and they go to sleep, they wake up, they are busy with their life for some days. Then again there is a fight. Sometimes on the same issue, that after 20 years, 30 years, you will hear this refrain, oh, you still don't understand me. You don't know this much. That's because in the circle of nature there is no solution. That's why even to resolve the problem of husband and wife, they must engage in yoga. Yoga is the most practical thing. The true yoga, not just the heart yoga and pranayama and breathing practices. So here we have that first thing is this. Because then one gets beyond that action of the ego and desire, which is the whole root of the difficulty. As long as we are in ego and desire, there is no solution. We can temporarily concede, but this is only temporary, subject to what you are conceding. After some time, it continues. But since this by itself seems to lead straight towards inaction, that's the problem. Now you go into that Shivoham, then neither the man is bothered nor the lady is bothered, and both are living like Himalayan yogis. That also creates a problem. Then there is no life. Ultimately you are withdrawing, waiting for the afterlife. As beyond nature, there is no instrumentality of action and no cause or determinant of action. Why would there be action at all? For the immutable self is inactive, impartial, and equal to all things, all workings and all happenings. This is how we have the description. So therefore, the yoga idea is brought in of the Ishvara, the divine as master of works and sacrifice. And it is hinted, but not yet expressly stated, that this divine exceeds even the immutable self, and that in him lies the key to cosmic existence. You can take a practical example. I have to be equal to all. As a yogi, this is the aspect. So you are dealing with everyone equally, you are a witness. But it would evidently create confusion in life, in everyday life. Now, if we go beyond this state of equality to the Ishvara, now things become very simple. Mother, what should I do? End of the story. She takes the entire burden onto herself. So this is the whole principle, that when we turn towards the divine, who is beyond the mutable and the immutable, then she takes care of everything, and you have to follow the divine will in action. Equality is the foundation, because as long as we are moved by preferences and desire and ego, we cannot act in the right way. But when we fulfill the divine will, then that's the route man has to take. So then he speaks about that who is this supreme, and the last sentence in this passage is, or the second last, will seems to be an aspect of the executive part of being, to be power and active force of nature, Shakti, Prakriti. Is there then a higher nature than that of the three gunas? Is there a power of pragmatic creation, will, action, other than that of ego, desire, mind, sense, reason, and the vital impulse? So, does this will operate in our everyday life? That's what. It's not like only for big things there is divine will. It's in everyday life. So, he says in the pragmatic will of the divine in every aspect and sphere of life. So now Shri Krishna starts by saying something very interesting. Firstly, he speaks about bhakti, that if a few lines below, it must ground the supremacy of bhakti over all other motives and powers of spiritual consciousness and action. It must be a knowledge of the Supreme Lord of all creatures, to whom alone the soul can offer itself in the perfect self-surrender, which is the highest height of all love and devotion. This is what the teacher proposes to give in the opening verses of the 7th chapter, which initiate the development that occupies all the rest of the book. Here, he says, now the Lord says, what does he say? How by practicing yoga with a mind attached to me. See, now the bhakti starts. It'll start with attachment to the divine, contact with the Ishvara, and finally it will end up with complete surrender and identification with the divine. And with me as Ashraya, the whole basis, lodgment, point of resort of the conscious being and action. Thou shalt know me without any remainder of doubt, integrally. Samagram mam. I will speak to thee without omission or remainder, asheshata. So this word, which is so important, that knowing the divine in some aspect or the other, as impersonal, as immutable, as a personal God, all this is okay. But in the totality, the Gita reveals the divine in totality, samagram mam, in all my completeness. And he says, Sri Krishna says, it's the rarest of rare yogi, one in thousands who knows me in all the principles and powers of my being. The implication, couple of lines below. So, before that, okay. Aseshata, for otherwise a ground of doubt may remain. The essential knowledge attended with all the comprehensive knowledge, by knowing which there shall be no other thing here left to be known. That's how actually Brahman is originally described, knowing which all else can be known. But how? If Brahman is only something which is separate from nature or creation, or only reflected in it as multiplicity of Purusha, then you cannot know anything. And that's why the big question that Sri Aurobindo raises, which everybody raises, including the scientists, that why does this taste sweet and tasty? So in other words, why does water assume the properties of water? Because hydrogen and oxygen combine, if you want to put it in very gross terms. Why does it assume that property, that fundamental property? So we take it for granted, water, H2O. So when you combine these two, what is this property which comes? That it flows, it's tasteless, colorless, odorless, but can take in all the colors. So this is where the whole problem comes. It's a problem which scientists are trying to give an answer. But you have to know God to really answer this question. Sri Aurobindo says you have to know God to explain even water. So, how it is, what is it that comes in? Where does it derive itself from? There must be something within the divine which has this quality of flowing, which can assimilate all things and give it its own unique shape. So that's how the Isha Upanishad will give a hint, Matarishva. Where does it come from? It is rooted in the self. So he says that I will speak to you, knowing which nothing else is left to be known. The implication of the phrase is that the divine being is all, Vasudevam Sarvam. And therefore, if he is known integrally in all his parts and principles, then all is known, not only the pure self, but the world and action and nature. There is a passing, writing of Sri Aurobindo, noting in fact in Bande Matram, those days, where he says the Gita is a national scripture. It should be declared a national scripture. And now this thought is coming up that it should be taught in classes, because actually this is giving us a clue to understand world, life, man. It's not just high philosophy or way of life, because when a scientist is grounded in childhood in the Gita, then he'll raise the right questions, and if he takes to yoga, he'll find the right answers. So the Gita is something so beautiful that, it's like knowing everything in its fundamental principles. So there is jnana and there is vijnana. Jnana is the essential knowledge, and vijnana is the same knowledge as it expresses in this or that creature, element, object. Isn't it interesting? Like, for example, see the same pattern, plan. So we observe the atom. So atom has a central core around which, things are moving. Isn't the same pattern in the solar system? Isn't the same pattern if you really go into the galaxies? And isn't it the same pattern we see in Orwell's? It's the same pattern. You have to understand that it's the same basic thing. There is a center around which things are moving. So, but the beauty of the divine is, as he'll explain later, he's at once the center and the circumference. There is a very beautiful description how all this can be understood if one really realizes that self which the Gita speaks about. So there is a word used in Hindi called Indrajal. Normally it's unfortunately used for magic. So what is Indrajal? Indrajal is like Indra, which is the global consciousness, not the Indra of the Puranas. He has woven this universe with a thread. The Gita uses this image in this very chapter. Thread in which there are multiple pearls. But the beauty is each of this pearl or this, gem reflects all the others. And this pearl also gets reflected in all the others. The new creation, each in all and all in each. Yes. So this is where, because this is the original, and that's why we cannot understand this Indrajal. The multiplicity of the divine, and yet he is at once the center of everything. At the same time, he is in everything. All things are contained within him, and he has become all things. So this is the realization the Gita is hinting us at. So next passage. Then, to start with, and in order to found this integral knowledge, the Gita makes the deep and momentous distinction, which is the practical basis of all its yoga. The distinction between the two natures, the phenomenal and the spiritual nature. So we spoke about the five elements: mind, reason, ego. This my eightfold divided nature. And then he says, but know my other nature different from this, the supreme which becomes the jiva and by which this world is upheld. Meaning thereby in this ignorance, this play of ego, desire and everything, still there is something in us which is a portion of the divine. See how he is bringing in this idea of the psychic being. And that portion has come straight from Paraprakriti. So even when we see in the Life Divine, Sri Aurobindo speaks of the sevenfold chord of being, but he brings the eighth element, which is the psychic being, which comes from Ananda. So this is the element within us which is directly in connection with the Divine Mother. And that's why contacting it is so important. Because if we go through the mind, quieten the mind, we may end up with the impersonal Brahman, great realization. But it doesn't give us the basis of action. But when we contact the psychic being, we come in contact with the Para Prakriti as well as the Ishvara automatically. So then we have a basis of action. That's why Mother used a very nice image for this Jiva. Jiva and Jivatma are often used interchangeably. Jiva generally for all creatures and Jivatma is the self within it. So she says that the psychic being is like the wire that connects the body, which is the lamp, and all that is based on the body, with the divine, the generator. So you see, the generator is power. That power comes through this door. So first thing he reminds that there is something called a Jiva, which comes from the Para Prakriti. Okay. So then we'll go to, and this manifests as Swabhava. He will develop this understanding of Swabhava and Swadharma in great detail subsequently. So we'll go to page 268. We start with this para. This is to throw the sense of the Gita into language suited to our modern way of thinking. But if we look at its description of the Para Prakriti, we shall find that this is practically the substance of what it says. For first, this other higher Prakriti is, says Krishna, my supreme nature. Prakritim me param. And this I here is the Purushottama, the supreme being, the supreme soul, the transcendent and universal spirit. Now this has very interesting practical implication. For speaking first of the origin of the world from the point of view of the active power of his nature, Krishna answers, this is the womb of all beings. Etad yonimi bhutani. Meaning thereby everything that is born. See, it is that power which has birth here is limiting itself. So that's why Maya. Maya is the power which is limiting that which is infinite. So it is his Maya. So he himself comes into birth in this being as the Jiva. So it is that power which gives birth. And that's why as long as we have not discovered this Jiva within, the Jivatma within, till then we regard that in nature, my physical parents, or so and so, they are my parents. And we have several parents at several levels. The teachers are also like that and other. But when we discover this Jivatma, then we have the one original parent. And that's the Divine Mother and of course the Lord. So this is very interestingly narrated in a story in one of the Puranas where we have Kartikeya. We know Kartikeya is born to slave Vritrasur, who has asked an impossible boon that only when Shiva's child can kill me. Now Shiva is not married and he presumes Shiva will never get married because yogis are not supposed to get married. For whatever reason he has that vague assumption. So fine, so he is very happy. Shiva will never get married. No question of child. But as the story unfolds, Shiva gets married. And Shiva has a child. And that child initially is brought up in two stages. One is in the fields of ignorance by the 6 kritikas. That's why he has the 6 face Shanmukam. That's how the name comes. Because these 6 powers in ignorant nature are bringing him up. Not like a warrior child. He is meant to slay Vritrasur. But they all love him. There's a whole story how he lands up there. But they all love him. And he is playful and he is so happy. Imagine 6 mothers, all of them loving this one child in the house. How beautiful that would be. Then one day Shiva says that we have to bring him back. So Shiva and Parvati go there and ask Shanmukam, please come, we are your parent. No, you can't be my parent. And if you were my parent, why did you forget me all along? So Shiva has some uncomfortable questions to face. Both of them answer. Finally he comes. Now when he comes, he is trained into becoming the warrior god. And then the same Kartikeya, Shanmukam, becomes the Deva Senapati. He is not just an ordinary warrior god, he is a warrior god whom the gods will obey as their chieftain. So this is the story of the psychic being. We too are offsprings of the mother and Sri Aurobindo. We have that mother symbol combined with Sri Aurobindo symbol. So perfect manifestation in the union of Ishvara and Shakti. So we have two stages at which we realize. One is where we are creation of nature. So we are born from nature. Like some people say, we are born of mud and we'll go to the mud. I tell them, look here, maybe for you, I am not born of mud and will go back to mud. This body is not everything. And even this body, I don't want to go to mud. Let the body also go as far as it can go towards that. Why should this kind of a pessimistic philosophy, because this is how it comes, this nature. So you have to go back. You have to go back empty-handed. All this, this is not the true truth of things. This is okay at a certain stage. When we are full of desires and attached to things, it's okay to know that, body is mud. But behind this mud, within this mud, even in the earth principle and all the other bhutas, there is the divine presence. So that's the whole basis of the transformation of the body and everything else. So Sri Krishna is laying the foundation. I am the birth of the whole world, and so too its dissolution. There is nothing else supreme beyond me. Now once we know this, then what will we say? I don't come from mud and go back to the mud. I come from the Lord and go back to the Lord. There's practical implications of these things. I come from the mother and go back to the mother. That's how he describes in Durga's Strot. That Mother Durga, from time to time, age to age, we come back, born of your own powers. Do your work and go back. To where? To there. In Savitri also we have the lines, night is not our beginning nor our end. We came to her from a supernal light to hide from too swift an awakening to world pain. But what is the truth? From the light we come, by light we live, and to the light we go. So in the Gita it is spoken of, I am the womb of all creatures. See? So that truth is being revealed. The spirit is the supreme being in his infinite consciousness, and the supreme nature is the infinity of power or will of being of the spirit. It is his infinite consciousness in its inherent divine energy and its supernal divine action. The birth is the movement of evolution of this conscious energy out of the spirit. Para prakritim jiva bhuta. So what does the Divine Mother do? Para prakriti. Out of the Ishvara, infinite consciousness, she brings out some aspect, some possibility, and it is born in the fields of nature, which is a limited birth outwardly. And that's why Sri Krishna says that though the jiva is not me, yet it is born out of me, it is a portion of me, mamae vansha. So we are all portions of the Divine Mother. Next passage, the supreme nature, para prakritihi, is then the infinite, timeless, conscious power of the self-existent being, out of which all existences in the cosmos are manifested and come out of timelessness into time. But in order to provide a spiritual basis for this manifold universal becoming, in the cosmos, the supreme nature formulates itself as the jiva. So all creation is coming, but as the jiva, it has entered into the individual elements. Now, what about others? That's why we can't ever make a cult out of this, or a cult which is too vast, because everybody is the Divine Mother's child. If you look at it in its deepest sense, that's what it means. So what is the difference? Difference is some people suddenly recognize it or realize it at a point of time. It's not that others are abandoned, but there is a twofold evolution, one in the darkness through finite experiences, and when we are ready, then we discover that behind this darkness, behind this ignorance, there always was the Divine Mother, waiting for us with open arms, and then we enter into that. But everybody is going toward that because everybody, each creature in the creation is emerged out of that. That is the eternal womb. So it brings a very wide, universal understanding of things. This will be actually the basis of universal brotherhood. It cannot be a religion which is confined to a cultish attitude. Cultish attitude is those who have adopted a certain belief system are brothers. You cannot have a basis of universal brotherhood based on that. But the moment you have a religion which says all of us are born from the same womb, regardless of our belief, non-belief, struggles, our understanding, then there is a basis that yes, we are all brothers. Some are awakened, some are not yet awakened, and so on and so forth. So this provides the spiritual basis. So page 270. Last passage here. The supreme nature of spiritual being gives us then both an original truth and power of existence beyond cosmos, and a first basis of spiritual truth for the manifestation in the cosmos. But where is the link between this supreme nature and the lower phenomenal nature? Now it's like, okay, Jiva, as the Jiva it is there. But what about all these things? Has the divine become all these things also? Now comes all that we have spoken about. I am the essence of all these things. On me, says Krishna, all this, all that is here, sarvam idam. The common phrase in the Upanishads for the totality of phenomenon in the mobility of the universe, yat kincha jagatyam jagat, is strung like pearls upon a thread. So this is the image that he gives. But this is only an image. We cannot press very far. Let us go then from the image to that which it images. So what is it that the image is? This one supreme power manifests not only in all as the one, but in each as the jiva, the individual spiritual presence. It manifests also as the essence of all quality of nature. So see, now it's not like all this individuality is an illusion. No, each individuality is something which is she has foreseen in her supreme vision and brought out. So there is a truth of the individual. But there is also a truth in the entire nature and all its manifold movement. Sarvamidam. So what is that truth? That is, again, behind every quality, every aspect, there is the presence of the divine, which is like its essence. And this is what Sri Aurobindo, the Gita speaks of. These are therefore the concealed spiritual powers behind all phenomena. This highest quality is not the working of the three gunas, which is phenomena of quality and not its spiritual essence. It is rather the inherent one, yet variable inner power of all these superficial variations. And then he speaks about the Swabhava, and so there are three things which Sri Aurobindo very beautifully brings. So there is the Mad Bhava, which is the divine bhava. Something of that becomes as the individual swabhava. And then in the ignorance, it becomes the phenomenal nature. So we have, for instance, as I said, when we look at this entire creation, mountain, it represents something of the divine truth. And if we go to the essence of the mountains, and it has implications in our life. Why do people want to go to the mountains when they are feeling sick and tired? What does the image of the mountain represent? Just looking, it can open doors to many practical, even interventions. Often we say when people are very bogged down by life, go to the mountains. So mountains carry within it that aspect of the divine, which is high, uplifting. It automatically lifts up. Watching the galaxies or the stars at night immediately widens us. So in everything, even in water, as we have said that I am taste in the waters, rasa. So everything carries something of the divine. In the earth, I am smell. So now you see, even the senses, if we go deep within it, actually can become gateways to something of the divine which is there inside. But what happens? The mind falsifies it. So if we have grown up, let's say, in the In India, we love the smell of masalas. But if you are a vegetarian, fish smell is like anathema for us. But somebody who is from Bengal, the smell of fish is like the relish. But if you go to the US and you cook South Indian food, especially in a house, you may have a police complaint. No, actually, I am not joking. So my friends used to have a problem, they would have to close the door and this is, see, these people, I said, this masala is relishing us. We feel so happy about it. It is the same. There's the truth behind it, so even behind smell. But here it enters into preferences, conditioning, habits. Certain smells we don't like the story of Sri Ramakrishna. That people who are, dealing with fishes, they can't bear the smell of flowers and vice versa. So that conditioning is entering into the triple mode. But essence of smell is divine. So we can transmute the smell to receive the divine smell everywhere in everything. And it is possible. For example, in certain states of yoga, one may smell roses and jasmine and so on and so forth, even when either nobody is there or when somebody is there who may not be smelling so good, but you smell that. Because you are smelling something which is much more essential and fundamental. Like some people when they have dining room food, some say it is very bland. Some say, oh my God, this is something which we really, really miss. Because now the taste has got tuned to something else, to that essential component in the food. So all this he describes. And then next page he speaks of that, page 272. First, the divine power and presence works within the 5 elemental conditions of matter. I am taste in the waters, sound in ether, scent in earth, energy of light in fire. So that's why original sound, if we can go to that, and that light of lights from which all other lights are born. So, this opens doors to a whole yoga. So page 273 will come. This we gather from the other terms of the series. I am the light of sun and moon, the manhood in man, the intelligence of the intelligent, the energy of the energetic, the strength of the strong, the ascetic force of those who do ascesis, tapasya. I am life in all existences. Meaning thereby, please don't take credit for anything in your life. The moment somebody says, I am a sadhak, that means he is downhill. The moment you realize the Divine Mother is doing the sadhana in you, and it's not a question of saying, and you really realize that what we could have done by our own so-called energy, then you are on the right track. And that's why the sign that one is moving closer to the divine is a tremendous humility. The more you go, the closer you go, the more humble you feel. Because you discover that it is the strength of the divine, it is the intelligence of the divine, because of which one has been able to, whatever is done through the person is all because of that. So he described, there's a whole list in the Gita. I am Pranav in all the Vedas. So the syllable. It is the essential quality in its spiritual power that constitutes the Swabhava. It is the force of the spirit so manifesting. And few lines below on this page. Know me to be the eternal seed of all existences, O son of Pritha. Parth, that is one of the names of Arjun. So Kunti, one of the names was Pritha. And then all this he goes. So meaning thereby that it is the divine who supports the strength. The moment you think that no, it is my strength, you cut yourself off from that universal and the transcendent strength. And therefore your strength becomes limited. Now then you will get the result based on the degree of your strength. And if you are meeting somebody who is also in the same ignorance, then if you are stronger, definitely. But when somebody links one's own individual strength to the origin of strength, which is the divine, then he becomes literally invulnerable. That is the difference between Arjuna and Karna. Whether they are equal or not is not the matter. But Arjuna with the divine, Krishna, that's why the Gita at the end, Sanjay says that wherever there is divine, Sri Krishna, wherever there is Arjuna, there is victory. So when Arjuna links his strength with Sri Krishna, then Bhishma, Dronacharya and all these great ones karna, none of them can ultimately harm him because he has linked his strength to the transcendent force. This is the basis of offering to the divine and connected. But it should be genuine, not that, oh, I have offered to the mother, but basically it's me. So then it doesn't work. Okay. So, page 275, there is another something very interesting. Or 274, the last line. The divine is there in that nature and supports him by its strength. Through the confusions of his lower existence, still he is able to recover the light. So even when there is darkness, the divine is there, so it is not affected by the darkness. Even when we are very weak, strength is still there. That's the beauty. So every time we suffer a fall, oh, I have suffered a fall, I am useless. No. One should refer back to the divine strength, that what is not possible for me, you can accomplish it. Behind every stumble. So that's what he's saying, that does not suffer the fall. That's why it is the divine nature supporting the ignorant nature. How beautifully puts it. The divine is there in that nature and supports him by its strength through the confusions of the lower existence, till he is able to recover the light, illumine wholly his life with the true sun of his being, and govern his will and its acts by the pure power of the divine will in his higher nature. This is the secret of yoga. Mother once says, my children, you all think that you are unfit, your difficulties are too great and you cannot conquer this and you are an impossible case. Then she said, do you know why? So, why mother we are the way we are? She said, no, because you are hypnotized by your difficulties and do not have faith in grace. This is her answer. So, every time one suffers a fall, faces a limitation, refer back to that original. He is not disconnected with this creation. He is in every element, everywhere, in everything. And if we keep the connection, because that connection is never broken, it remains in its own original plenitude. And that will help us recover back, and ultimately pull us out of that zone of darkness. So he says, very interesting, but how can the divine be desire, kama? Because there is a phrase like that also. I am the desire in things which are consistent with dharma. So, how can he be kama? For this desire, this kama has been declared to be our one great enemy who has to be slain. But that desire was the desire of the lower nature of the rajasic, of the gunas, which has its native point of origin in the rajasic being. This other, the spiritual, is a will not contrary to the dharma. So there he comes, that is this sattvic? No. Few lines below he says, dharma in the spiritual sense is not morality or ethics. Dharma, says the Gita elsewhere, is action governed by the swabhava, the essential law of one's nature. And this swabhava is at its core the pure quality of the spirit in its inherent power of conscious will and in its characteristic force of action. The desire meant here is therefore the purposeful will of the divine in us, searching for and discovering not the pleasure of the lower prakriti, but the ananda of its own play and self-fulfilling. So you see, when a snake bites, you don't say you are a sinner, you are evil. No, you don't say that. It's acting according to its dharma. The dharma of the snake to defend itself, if you press on it, it will bite. But if man brings out fangs, it is not dharma. Because this is not the swadharma. But if the same man slays at the command of the divine, it's one of the places Sri Aurobindo says, he who would not slay when the divine bids him causes an incalculable evil in the world. But then he of course also says, but first be sure that you have the divine command. So the same action done at the bidding of the divine and done at the bidding of the ego are two very different things. And that test is of course within man. So dharma is not about certain things morally, you should not kill, thou shalt not do this. No. Dharma is the will of the divine as it is manifesting in an individual at a given point of time. It's not a standard format or a rule book, same which applies to everyone. And last, we come to this. Finally, very powerful, 276. This elusive Maya, so this is how the Maya has brought in the divine into the becoming. Actually, Maya has brought the divine into this play. Through the Maya, he has entered into the play. As if he is limited, as if he is indivisible, he is infinite, but in all these finite elements. This elusive Maya hides from us the divine that we are, the infinite and imperishable spirit. By these three kinds of becoming, which are of the nature of the gunas, this whole world is bewildered and does not recognize me, supreme beyond them and imperishable. Last passage we'll read. But why then, since the divine is there after all, and the divine nature at the root even of these bewildering derivations, since we are the Jeev and the Jiva is that, is this Maya so hard to overcome? Maya, Duratya, because it is still the Maya of the divine. At one place, Sri Aurobindo says, you cannot slay Maya, you can slay Moha. Moha is wrong attachment to things, wrong orientation through ego and desired self. But we can be attached to everything, attached in that sense, that connected with everything, but through the divine. The line in Savitri, our self shall be one self with all through her. So we can connect with the whole world on this basis, that there is this divine presence on. Then there are no more ego, desire, all these fights, quarrels. We always rush, oh, this life is so meaningless, let's go away, there is only quarrel and fight. But it's because of the wrong orientation. We need to correct ourselves, tune to the divine and deal with life according to the divine impulsion, divine guidance. And this is very powerful line, we'll just read page 277. It is a cosmic veil which the Godhead has spun around our understanding. Brahma, Vishnu and Rudra have woven its complex threads. The Shakti, the supreme nature, is there at its base and is hidden in its every tissue. We have to work out at this base we have to work out this web in ourselves. This is the web of karma. This is what has to be, being worked out through the process of life to life. Not some reward and punishment. This web. So this web has to work out this web in ourselves and turn through it and from it, leaving it behind us when its use is finished. Turn from the gods to the original and supreme Godhead, in whom we shall discover at the same time the last sense of the gods and their works and the inmost spiritual verities of our own imperishable existence. To me, who turn and come, they alone cross over beyond this Maya. How beautiful this is. Okay, so we'll meet next week.